To what extent do you think he's influenced by an aging population and obvious problems in the economy that we read about? Does that impact, does that encourage him to an adventure, or does it make him more careful, do you think?
It's an interesting question. I mean, what I would say is at the moment there's almost no economic or demographic statistic which is looking positive for the Communist Party these days. And so, you know, it used to be said as a sort of a shorthand that if the party was delivering 6% growth a year, that was sufficient to sort of meet the aspirations of the Chinese people for constantly improving living standards. And, well, we haven't seen that for quite some time. I mean, I think Chinese growth this year is probably going to be more like 3 or 4%. The demographic aspects figure into this as well, which is to say that, China does now look like it's falling into a middle income trap where it doesn't actually have the capacity to get wealthier at the pace that is sort of required to lift living standards. And even on the one-child policy, David, which I think is an interesting example, you know, China now has an overhang of something in the order of 30 or 40 million young Chinese men who are unlikely ever to find a partner because of the consequences of the one-child policy back in the day. That's now been abandoned. The party's actually telling its people to have 3 children, but they're not listening. They're not listening to the party on that score. But, you know, here's an interesting little fact which I sort of tumbled to not so long ago, is that if you're a Chinese family looking to help your son find a partner, one of the best things you can do is to buy that son an apartment. And so a very significant number of Chinese investment has gone into purchasing apartments off the plan, which are never going to be built now because the Chinese housing sector is in such a crisis. And something like a third of all Chinese purchasing of property, which is now caught up in the housing crisis in China, was purchased precisely for a single male child as part of the aspiration to help them find a partner. So if we see a collapse of the Chinese housing market, that's going to have been driven by bad party decisions with regard to the one-child policy from, 20 or 30 years ago. So really what I'm saying to you here is that all of the big economic and demographic steps that the party has taken over quite a few decades now are going bad. And on top of that, Xi Jinping's Belt and Road strategy, that's failing. And it was originally thought it was going to be building dependence on the part of a whole bunch of countries on China, instead of which it's just stocked up a huge volume of debt, which is now dragging down Chinese banks. And the question that I think Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party leadership have to deal with now is, well, if we're failing in that respect, what can we do? What can we do to sustain our grip on power by having the Chinese people support us? And I think the answer is we're stoking nationalism. We're getting the Chinese population angry about Japan. And in fact, if you look at Chinese media, there's a huge volume of documentaries and soap operas which are being on Chinese TV, which are all about making the Chinese population angry with the Japanese for their historical behaviour. You're saying to China that the only way you can realise the China dream is you must take over Taiwan. And so there's quite a steam of nationalist sentiment building up on, yes, we need a war to take back Taiwan. And I think this is a deliberate but also very risky strategy on the part of the Communist Party. because it's one thing to stoke that nationalism, but you can then find yourself being dragged along by that nationalism as well.